My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. During tax season, your personal info travels to a lot of places. Between payroll, your tax consultant, and the IRS. If your W-2 gets exposed, that's just the ticket for identity thieves. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it guaranteed or your money back. Don't let identity thieves take you for a ride. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
When the game tips off, the NBA action is just beginning on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because FanDuel is your home for NBA live betting. However you want to play, now is the perfect time to join. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. 21 plus and present in Virginia. First online, real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Welcome to
4Kids Flashback. Hello, welcome to 4Kids Flashback. My name is Tara Sands, and I'm joined by...
Steve Yurko.
There he is.
Here I am.
Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. I wonder when this was recorded.
I know. Well, we usually do afternoon record, so I feel like I feel a little strange doing a daytime. And truth be told, if you hear some weird noises during this interview, there was a notice put up that they're cleaning my roof and gutters in my building today.
I thought so those are just the birds.
No, yeah. So if you hear something crazy, because I'm on the top floor, so It's only 3 floors. It's not like I'm in the penthouse. It's 3 floors. But you might hear like crazy footsteps, and I'll try to remove any of it that I can. But
that just sort of like reminds me when I say I'm from New York, and people just immediately assume the city, and I'm like, no, not that cool.
You got to say New York State.
Yeah. The rest of it.
The other part of New York. Well, I just had this conversation with someone, too, who said they're from Chicago. And I was like, well, really Chicago or like a suburb? She's like, no, a suburb. And I was like, yeah, I figured. Not I figured, but like so many people just say Chicago or New York when they and I grew up in a suburb of New York City, but it was technically in New Jersey. So because my guilt complex is so strong, I cannot lie and say that I'm from New York.
But Los Angeles is so big that you can say that.
You can say it. Yeah, that's true.
And also, I prefer not to be doxxed. So.
Why would you get doxxed by saying...
No, just saying, like, I'll just say, yeah, I live in Los Angeles. And, that's a...
Well, I'm confused, though. Why would being more specific lead to doxing?
I don't want people
to know exactly. You mean if you said, like, Encino, or you, like, that you'd be more likely to be doxed?
Possibly, yeah.
Oh. Okay. I didn't think of it like that, but now I'm just going to be like, I live in the greater Los Angeles area.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just me being, like, a little overprotective, but it's more like, you don't have to know. Just know, just assume I live in Los Angeles. Like I could see everything from my window, the Hollywood sign, the beach.
Everything. I wanted to plug a friend's show that some of you guys might like, because we are running some promos for it at some point. Maybe they might be done by the time you guys hear this, but it's called Make Me a Nerd. And it's hosted by my friend Mandy Kaplan, who's also a voice actor. But this is she has very mainstream tastes. And she wants to get into things that are, and it's so funny. We had this whole conversation last night about what is even nerd culture anymore, because everything is so mainstream.
Yeah. It's
that it doesn't even really...
Because like if you made like a Star Wars reference in the 90s that was considered like kind of niche, you know.
Right. And now
you buy a bottle of like, you know, soap and it has Grogu on it at this point now.
Totally. Yogurt. Yeah, Gogurt. I thought I loved the Grogu Gogurt mashup. I did call Grogu Gogurt for a long time.
But it
was way cuter.
It's happening with like One Piece now too. Like One Piece is no longer this like little, you know, it's like a niche thing for like a Westerner, I'll say. But
well, the minute there's T-shirts in Target, that's when I know something is more mainstream. I mean, I go to the airport now and I look around me and everyone is wearing an anime T-shirt. Like I start like the game isn't fun anymore because it's so many.
I can't believe we're talking about this, but like I think there's merit to it. It's kind of like, oh yeah, I kind of just like it's not as fun anymore when it's kind of like this little like shared little.
It was your secret. Like you found your people through it, and you kind of it indicated something about those people, and I don't think it no longer indicates something about those people.
I'm less likely now to like approach someone wearing a One Piece shirt and say like nice shirt. I did that at the gym like once years ago, and like I showed off like my tattoo, which is which is very like kind of like if you know like One Piece tattoo, and the person just like looked at me like just blank stare, and I'm like I am never doing that again.
Right. Well, like my friend's husband was wearing a Topps shirt the other day, like Topps trading cards, and we had just interviewed the guy who had worked at Topps, and I was like, oh, are you do you collect? He's like, oh no, I just like the shirt. And I was like, okay, never mind. Like I was going to impress him with like this cool person I had just talked to. And then I was like, oh, now this stuff. And now there's like no stigma attached to any, and not that trading cards, because I mean, that was sports memorabilia and stuff too. But even like wearing a shirt or getting a tattoo doesn't necessarily indicate things anymore, which is so interesting to me. But yeah,
and it's the episode of The Simpsons when everyone is like do what you feel day, when everyone starts acting like Bart Simpson, and then he just kind of he doesn't feel special anymore.
Look at us
complaining. It's like, oh, we don't feel special anymore.
Not complain. But so it was funny because she wants me to be on the show to try to convert her to like something that I like that's nerdy, and unfortunately, she and I have the same nerdiness, so there was nothing that we could come to terms on that I could, but our guest I'm so excited for you guys to hear Ron London today. Check the show notes for links, and we'll be right back with Ron London. Our guest today is Ron London, someone I was lucky enough to work with a lot at 4Kids. He was a director, mixer, sound designer, audio engineer there. Before going there, he worked at Buttons, which is a place we've talked about on the podcast before. So that's great because he can go into some more detail about that. Also at Reel to Reel, which is another studio in New York that's come up a few times. Welcome to the show, Ron London.
Thanks, Tara and Steve. Thank you for inviting me. Appreciate being here.
We've been trying to get you on for a long time, let's be honest.
This
finally happened.
Yes, we made it happen today. Yes.
Woohoo! So because you were somebody that I did see a lot and was a huge part of our time at 4Kids because you interacted with the actors, you know, more than a lot of the other people we've spoken to on this show. So thank you for being here.
For sure.
But I can't ignore, I know it's not 4Kids related, but you did some very, very cool things in your career with music in like the late 80s, early 90s, which I guess was your introduction to doing sound design. Can you talk a little bit about that, how you knew how to work this equipment in the first place and who you worked with?
Sure. That's very kind of you to bring that up. I appreciate it. So I started in music, and I worked at a music studio near my house in Jersey. And their claim to fame was they did all the Kool and the Gang records there. And it was kind of tucked away in this, it was called the House of Music, and it was tucked away in this house, and they had like 7 acres, and they had a big field and pond and a pool behind the studio. And our thing was to pick up the clients from New York and bring them back to Jersey. So that was my first job as an intern at the House of Music, and kind of worked my way up into being in the studio and really learning all the gear there. And to me, it was like a giant playland because I love that kind of electronic equipment. I used to love to fix stereos. If anybody today still knows what a stereo is, building speakers and all that kind of stuff. And when I got to a place that had all this equipment, it was just like, wow, what does all this do? And, hooking up pianos, microphones and pianos and recording them. And it was just tremendous.
Okay, if our younger listeners don't know Kool and the Gang, stop listening and go listen to that for a little bit. I mean, come on now. That's so cool, pun intended.
Oh, nice.
Oh, my God.
They might know through TikTok because I have seen a couple of their songs wind up as dances on TikTok. So maybe through the ages, it's come back again.
Oh, maybe. So what kind of equipment were you working on back then? I mean, like, just so people understand this process was so not what it is today. Like you couldn't learn it at home. We're in our homes recording right now. What were you mixing with and doing all that with?
Right, exactly. And there was really no school at the time to learn it. So I went to college, I went to University of Delaware, and they didn't really have an audio technology program at all. I worked in the radio station there and did some recording there. I did some hosting of a radio show there. So that was kind of my introduction. But the House of Music was completely different. It was 2 large studios. They had a Neve mixing console, which is, one of the it's a British console. It's one of the nicer ones that you'll see out there. They still make them now. It's about a $600,000 mixing console. And it was all done with tape back then because computers weren't fast enough and required a lot of space to record things to. So it was unheard of to do stuff to computers as it is now. So it was this fat tape. It was 2-inch tape, and we could record separate tracks on the tape, just like you can in GarageBand or Pro Tools or Logic or anything like that. But it's all linear, as opposed to where computers are nonlinear. You could drop from one piece to another. We had to do a lot of editing with razor blades and tapes back then. We had to synchronize several tape machines to get more tracks because each tape machine only had 24 tracks and we typically needed 48 tracks. So there was a lot of technology behind the scenes, a lot of understanding how things worked. They had amazing equipment. I mean, besides the mixing board, there were, lots of different microphones that were curated from the 60s and 70s. They all had their different sounds and you'd use them on different instruments. So it was a process of learning what previous engineers might use and what they would, like the sound of for a vocal or for a guitar amp, how to kind of get that to tape and how to get it to all sound good and how to get it to blend, in the end, the mixing of it all. So it was definitely all a process. In fact, recently, I found some cassette tapes, if any of your listeners know what that is, of some mixes that I have done from back then. So I was kind of picking them apart.
What did you find? Oh, my gosh.
So I found a couple things. I found some early bands that I worked with that were sort of rock-oriented. But I also found this tape from Art Garfunkel because I did some sessions with him.
Wow.
So he was actually one of my first clients that I worked with. And,
no pressure.
Yeah, exactly. So he was one of the people that I would pick up from New York because, as I said, I was an intern and part of my job was driving the clients back and forth with the limousine. So we spent a lot of time in the car going back and forth to New York and we were chatting and he said he wanted to do these demo sessions and wanted to know if I'd like to engineer them. And of course I said yes, but I mean, it was a tremendous amount of pressure because he expected a lot. And I was very new at it.
You must have been like a baby.
Yeah.
You were a child.
I was, I was like 22, 23 years old.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So I'll name drop a little bit some of the other bands that you recorded there, like the Fugees, Phoebe Snow, Lauryn Hill. Like, I mean, now's the time if you want to reveal any secrets and dish, you can do it now.
Well, it's funny with the Fugees. I mean, that was a great record to work on. I really enjoyed them. They're very talented. I worked with Wyclef setting up his home studio back in that time. And
wow.
Recently, actually, maybe it was about 2 months ago, I work in broadcasting now, and he came on our show. He was a guest on our show via Zoom. So he wasn't actually in the studio, but I talked to him via Zoom. So it was kind of funny to, I did the whole check-in process to make sure everything was working. And then I'm like, hey, this is Ron from House of Music. And it's been, probably 30 years since we've talked to each other. And it totally came back to him. And we had, just a quick remembrance chat. But it was fun.
I'd like to think that reconnecting with me after all these years is a lot like reconnecting with Mike Leff.
Well,
I mean, it's very similar.
Very similar. Yes.
Okay, so from House of Music, House of Music, yeah, that's the name. You didn't continue in the music world. You went into more like audio spoken word recording. Was that a conscious decision, or is that just where the next job was, or how did that work out?
Yeah, so the business kind of changed, and when I got in it, it was rough. I mean, in the 60s, 70s, everybody went to the studio to record, but probably I guess it was the early 90s, home recording was becoming more of a thing, and it wasn't so much computer based, but it was tape based, but digital tape based, and people realized that for the amount that they would get for a record deal, instead of spending that in the studio, they could buy equipment and set up their studios at home. So the face of the studios really changed, and a lot of these mid-level studios like House of Music went out of business. So it was kind of a sad time because, I mean, here I am in a career, and I worked on a Kool and the Gang record, I worked with the Fugees, I worked with Art Garfunkel. I'm thinking, here we are, we're shooting to stardom, and it's like, nope, all these studios are now going under. Everything in the studio was auctioned. And it was a time to find what's next.
So maybe I know this is off topic. So it almost seems like the people who were still going to studios were either the superstars that could just afford ridiculous studio time, or the very small bands who couldn't afford a home studio. Is that right? So anyone in the middle had a home studio.
True.
Okay.
And the small bands would come in on a day. There was one producer I would work with. They'd come in on a Sunday and record a whole song from beginning to end, which was, it was good as a new engineer to learn how to do all this stuff quickly. But it was a lot to do in one day. It's just a lot of different scenarios that you have to kind of figure out and kind of get through. Because they're paying hourly, so you want to make it all happen quickly. So House of Music went out of business, I think 92, 93, something like that. And I was looking for the next thing, which turned out to be advertising. So working in studios that still did advertising. So it was amazing to me that in the end days of House of Music, we had $1 million in gear in these rooms, and we were barely getting $50 or $100 an hour to be in there because, people would work at home or, there just wasn't the budget. So how can you support that? It barely paid the electric. But I found that the advertising studios, advertisers have big budgets. If they do a video, they might spend, tens of thousands on the video and maybe thousands on the audio. So to spend $250 an hour on an audio studio is really not a big deal to them. So the audio studios that were doing the sweetening part or the voiceovers and the mixing of the audio for these commercials were still in business and they were still making money. So I transitioned to doing that, and that was real recording where I met Eric Stewart and Questar. And I think there's...
We'll get to Questar. Yeah, he was another engineer that we worked with. Yeah.
And so, that was a pretty cool scenario. I did that. I worked at Gray Advertising, which was a big advertising studio in the city. So I did that for a few years, and I don't remember how Buttons came on the line, but I started doing some freelance work, doing advertising work for them. And that advertising work is basically recording voiceovers. So they go, a voiceover artist will go in with a script, they'll read it. And as the engineer, I would edit it and maybe sync it to the picture or send it off to somebody, maybe add sound effects and music and things like that. But that was basically that.
So for those who don't know, Buttons was where we first recorded Pokémon. So much like the end of the studios closing down and people going, recording from home, 4Kids did not have their own studios originally. They were paying for outside studios and just like everyone else realized, oh, hey, we should just build our own.
Right.
So do you remember when you first saw like you were there from the very beginning, if I'm remembering correctly, right?
Yes, exactly. So I was working at Buttons, and I actually just bought a house with my family, and they offered me, I was freelance up until then, and they offered me a gig that would be 6 months. So I'm like, all right, that sounds good. I could probably pay my mortgage for that amount of time. So what is this gig? And the owner said it's ADR engineer for this animation that we got in. So I'm like, okay, that sounds good. I don't know what that is, but I'll learn how to do it. So if anybody has ever heard of ADR, I know Tara knows what ADR is.
You can go for explain that to just people who don't know. Yeah.
So it stands for automatic dialogue replacement, and it was intended for movies, because in a lot of movies, if you can believe it, they shoot the movies live, but a lot of the dialogue is replaced. Maybe 90% of the dialogue is replaced later on in the studio. So they would put these cues into a system, and it would automatically cue the actor to where they should speak to replace that line. But the automatic was never a thing for us. It was, I don't know where that came in. So we would, as an ADR engineer, you would put a series of beeps right before the line where the actor needed to speak, and the beeps would cue the actor when to talk. So it's a series of 3 beeps that is probably still going through your head at this time.
Oh, right now I'm hearing it. It's it just plays rent free in my head all the time. Yeah. Beep, beep, beep. The 3rd beep is a little longer.
Right, yeah. Right. And then you speak, where the 4th imaginary beep would be. It was always fun to explain to a new actor how to approach that. So we would record these scripts. We'd get the script for the show. We would record it character by character, line by line, every cue, whether it's a line or a reaction, everything would be done separately. Everything would kind of be microscoped by myself or by the director in the room. We would move it around so it would fit the lip flap, because so just stepping back, sorry to jump ahead here, but so the show that Button said was coming in was called Pokémon, and nobody ever heard of that. It was brand new. I'm like, all right, it's this Japanese animation, and they had a digital system there, so it was all based on a computer system. It was all recorded to the computer. Our video was also non-linear, which means that we could just drop our cursor anywhere in the session and the video would follow, which was also a new thing. I mean, it was very expensive to have a system like that, but it made the time with the actors more kind of economical, I guess, because you're not rewinding, you're not waiting for machines. You could just drop the cursor and start recording, and you could do take after take after take, and then decide which take you wanted to use.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Still getting around to that fix on your car? You got this. On eBay, you'll find millions of parts guaranteed to fit. Doesn't matter if it's a major engine repair or your first time swapping your windshield wipers. eBay has that part you need, ready to click perfectly into place for changes big and small. Loud or quiet, find all the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. But you already know that. eBay. Things, people, love. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Hey guys, Tara here. If you are enjoying the 4Kids Flashback podcast, here is another podcast you will probably like. It's called the One Piece Podcast. They have been covering One Piece since 2009, so there are about 1 million episodes for you to listen to. Highly recommend it. They do all kinds of behind-the-scenes stuff, break down the shows, interview actors. You're gonna dig it. Go to onepiecepodcast.com or look them up wherever you hear podcasts. And you might even hear a familiar voice that sounds a lot like Steve Yurko. Check it out now. Thanks. So were you there early enough to remember, like, the tests for Pokemon, like figuring out, like I know Eric Stewart was in there early and they didn't know how to even pronounce Pokemon at the time. They were doing like different, like were you privy to those conversations or did you come in for episode 1?
Yeah, so I do remember the pronunciation thing, and it still gets to me when people pronounce it because it's Pokemon is the way it's supposed to be. And I remember they had a teaser video at one point, and it was very important to the Japanese that the Japanese producers, that we pronounce it right. And also,
but early episodes, we said it differently.
Yes, a lot of people said it differently. Yeah. And I remember in the tease video, even the voiceover artist who did the video pronounced it several different ways in the video. So I don't remember where it was, but at one point, Norman, who was sort of captaining this whole process, made sure that everybody pronounced it Pokemon. So it has that.
Once the decision was really made, then it was drilled in. But their early days, it was all over the place.
Right. Yeah, I do remember some of that vaguely.
Can I ask what you thought of the show the first time? Because I know I was like, oh, I'll never see these people again. This is weird.
Yeah.
What did you think?
Yeah, I agree. I'm like, this is 6 months, and I'll get paid, and it's a nice fun to work with these people. But yeah, I didn't think it would take off the way it did. I don't know if I think the launch in Japan was before we started producing it in the US, but I think one of the driving forces might have been from episode 1 when Pikachu had the thunder attack. If you remember that, it was kind of a light that flashed, and it was a big story because in Japan when it aired, it
the seizures.
You're right, it created seizures.
That was a later episode actually. But they were so far ahead of us. That was, one of the episodes.
Oh, okay. So, thank you. Do you remember what episode? It was it was the first season, but probably the first few.
Was it, Steve, do you remember?
I don't know the number. It was the Porygon episode.
I was gonna say that.
Okay.
Yeah. But we did not air that one.
Okay.
Yes, they pulled that episode.
Okay.
So you're working on this weird show. Do you remember the audition process at all? Like, I know some of the auditions were at Jim Malone's apartment. I didn't go. I don't remember that.
I don't remember that.
So were you part of that process too?
I don't think so. I think I came in when we were starting to record. So at Buttons, they had two main studios, and he rented another office and put a studio in this other place. He put a soundproof booth in there. So that's kind of when I came about. I think it was for the recording of it. I don't remember doing the tests. I think the actors were pretty well set. And
do you have any, I won't want to put you on the spot and we can cut this. Like, if you have any just funny memories of those early days, like I remember faxes flying in with rewrites and just it being it felt haphazard. Obviously there was a bigger machine behind all this, but it felt chaotic. It felt like this show's going, we're doing this, it's going on television. What's happening?
Right. I don't remember that so much from the early days, but I remember doing some of this at 4Kids, and some of the writers would take their time to write the script, which always worked out because he would try to make it punny, because as a parent, I understand this, that your kids are watching it, but you're maybe watching it with your kids. So to make it funny for the kid and for the adult is, sort of, two birds with one stone kind of thing.
Right.
So he would sort of carve out these lines to make it work like that. And it was complicated because, typically the storyline that was in the original Japanese version wasn't the same as the US version. And then we also had to match the lip flap. So you have to have a story, you have to have stuff that makes sense, and it's got to match the lip flap. And of course, it's got to be punny. So it's a lot to create that. I think from what I remember, it might take 8 hours. Is that right? To do a page of dialogue? It's quite intense. Maybe I might be off by a little bit, but it was a lot. I do remember sometimes the actors being in the booth waiting for the next page to arrive.
Totally.
And then there was kind of a ban on that. I remember Norman said, okay, all scripts need to be finished before we actually start recording, because it's obviously a waste of time.
Yeah, we'd be pages to hang out and wait, which was fine with me.
Right,
I was like, okay, I'll hang out.
Of course.
So did some people just not get, you would probably see actors who just couldn't match the lip flap. Like, I feel like some people took to it and some didn't, and some people just took longer. Like, was that a frustration as an engineer that must have driven you crazy?
I mean, that's what we did all day. Sometimes it was frustrating, like when you'd get a new actor, because if there's a line and maybe it's got 3 sentences and there's a break between the sentences, a lot of times the actor would look at it and see where the break is and pause what they're saying. But some actors would just kind of run right through it all, and then you'd give them some corrections and they'd continue to run right through it, even though you say, okay, there's a break, you want to pause there. Yeah. And then eventually it's just like, all right, they're not going to pause, so I'm going to make an edit and I'll move it. But sometimes that doesn't sound that natural. Right. So, I mean, I didn't get frustrated because that's just the way it is. We would do so many takes on things because this was the first season and they were very particular on what they wanted. The director was very particular. Jim directed a lot of it, and Michael Hegney directed the other parts of it. And they were a pleasure to work with. I mean, we laughed a lot. Yeah. I can't remember what all the things were, but I do remember being like just falling on the floor laughing sometimes. It was mostly fun. I mean, it was a lot of work too, because they budgeted 2 minutes per cue. So.
Oh, that's not enough.
Right. And I mean, it could be a reaction or it could be a long line.
Right.
Or you could be joking around with, people are, maybe somebody's got to run to the restroom or grab a coffee. Those are all the 2 minutes in that hour that you have to be productive. So it was a heavy deadline that we had to meet, and there were often corrections. But even on like a line that was just a reaction, we might do 20, 30, 40 takes on it till it was just right. Because, I mean, sometimes, as you probably know as a voice actor, it's hard to get emotion out of just one sound.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Sometimes we'll take longer to record a short react than we will like a 2-sentence cue, because when you have words, it's a lot easier. Like, even with just we're just saying our name. So Bulbasaur, you're like, okay, but say Bulba, but sound confused, angry, and also excited, like, right. Or whatever it was. And you're like, okay, but I have 2 syllables to do that. It's right. That could take longer.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
As crazy as that is. Yeah.
So yeah, it was a long process to do that. We worked basically regular hours. I think it was like 9 to 7. And if it was 6:59 and 30 seconds, Michael would say, okay, I think we have time for one more line. So every minute was used there. I know we did break for lunch, but it was a lot to do. But we had different actors coming in through the day. So it was fun to see everybody, get to know everybody. It was quite an interesting position to be in. And I had never done that kind of work before. So it was really exciting at first.
So I was maybe you can help me with the timeline too, because I know we started recording at Buttons. Then at some point we moved to Taj and then to 4Kids. So do you remember why Buttons stopped working on it? I mean, I think it's just because Taj had the translators and whatever, and then they were building their own. But do you remember more than that?
Yeah, I think honestly, a lot of it was budgetary. I'm not sure what the costs were, but I believe it was very expensive to be at Buttons. He treated us more like an advertising client than as a kind of project-based client.
Oh, okay.
And I think if he had done it more like a project-based, we would have done more seasons there. But it was just wildly expensive when we got to the end, and there were all these additional costs that were added in. Just like if you were working, for Gray or Saatchi and Saatchi, and they just didn't have the money to do that. So they went over to Taj, where Larry Juris had the facility for this, and I believe Jim Malone did a lot of the engineering and directing there. And
he would do both at the same time.
Armin too, I think. I remember that.
Yeah. He was an engineer. Yeah.
So I did a little bit over at Taj, not too much. But I don't remember how long they were at Taj for, maybe a year or 2 or something.
Yeah, maybe 2 years. The timeline's fuzzy to me too. But at some point you get a call from 4Kids itself. So how was that decision made? Were you like, absolutely, or were you working somewhere else and you're like, I don't know, or...
Yeah, so that was an interesting call. They wanted me to come in. They had a new show that they were working on called Yugioh. I'm like, all right, I don't know what this is, but
Never heard of it. Yeah.
Like, what is it? Like this Pokemon thing? I don't know. So they said, why don't you come in for 2 weeks and see, if you like it, and we can take make a judgment after that. We can both do that. So a similar situation where it was a Japanese animation. We needed to record the dialogue, but this one also needed sound design and music and mixing. So it was a little bit more stuff that needed to be added.
Well, and a lot of video editing as well. Like they were making all these content changes to the show,
right?
Like, or even just the rotoscoping of all the violence or the skirt length, or like, I guess that didn't affect you as much, and I didn't know about it. But I mean, were you hearing about that, or was it just sort of like, okay, I'm doing this job, so I don't have to worry about any of that?
Well, some of it would affect us because if it was a timing change, then that would affect us. So we would typically get a picture, the video, and it has time code on the bottom, hours, minutes, seconds, and frames, and everything is based on that. The cues on our script are based on that. Everything lines up to this time code. And the audio and the video sync up because of this time code. But when you cut things out or add things, it changes where the placement is in reference to this time code. So once they do that, we need to match our audio files to the video files. So it would get a little complicated. Sometimes they might make 3 edits and they would give us notes on those 3 edits, and it wouldn't be so bad. But sometimes it could be 40 or 50 edits that they make, and you have to do them in a particular order, otherwise it won't work. And it was a little frustrating sometimes because some of the editors were better than others, where they would give you the exact time code. Some might have written it wrong. If you write one of those frames wrong, all of your edits from that point on are going to be incorrect, and then nothing matches. So there was a lot of back and forth between me, at least, and some of the other audio editors and the video people, trying to get all this stuff lined up. So their changes sometimes did affect us. But it did teach me, because I work on films now, about how to change the audio for picture changes. Because even when a director gives you a locked cut, which means there won't be any more changes in the picture, that doesn't mean it's locked. That means it's going to be, there's going to be changes. And a lot of times you're working with hundreds of tracks, hundreds of individual tracks, and all these little segments, these thousands of little clips need to move along and be in the exact right place. So it did take some precise editing to make all that match.
Yeah, and I should explain too, like, audio engineers have different functions, like, depending on what you're working on. Like, when I do a commercial, the engineer doesn't necessarily, like, have as much input as when I'm doing, like, when you're doing a dub like this, it's all hands on deck. Like, if there's a rewrite, the engineer's pitching in. Like, we're all having a conversation about, like, oh God, what can we fit in here? Also, the engineer's eyes are so important because they're able to see often better than the director. Like, sometimes it's the director that says, oh, move that 3 frames to the left. But often it's the engineer who's like, you need to move, like, depending on. So it's much more collaborative with, like, the engineer is almost like an assistant director for these dub projects.
Right.
Right? Like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong about any of this.
No,
but
absolutely. That's all correct. I appreciate you recognizing that too, because that's not really known, which is what I think kind of got me into the director position, because there was a point that I was making more comments to the actors than the director, or I would make a comment and the director would hit the talkback button and say exactly what I said. And at one point, I went to Michael, who was the producer of the show I was working on. I'm like, hey, let's cut the middleman out. I can hit the button and say what I'm, wanting to say. But it wasn't really their thing at 4Kids. They wanted to have 2 separate people in those chairs. They wanted a director and an engineer. So it was sort of a first for them to have me do both jobs, which they tried me out in. Yeah. And I liked it and it worked. It was a very busy job, though.
I find it so, I don't know if you know this, but that's what Susie Goldish does full time now. She engineers and directs at the same time for anime.
Oh, really? Okay.
And she probably learned that from you. I work with her all the time.
Oh, okay. She's in Los Angeles?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Wow.
But it's a unique skill set. But I find those sessions when it's one person doing both of those jobs to be so much more efficient than any. There's two people I know of who do it here, and then you did it in New York. Like there's not a lot of you that are good at it.
Oh, thank you.
But when you are, it's so much more efficient because there's like I don't know how to explain it. It's just a gelling between the actor and the engineer director.
Right.
Because you're like in sync in a different way.
Right. I mean, I felt myself more connected to the projects as well because I would read the script ahead of time. Because if we would do this, I don't know if your listeners understand that the actors aren't in the same room at the same time. So these are done piece by piece. Yeah. So the actor needs to understand what the emotion is of the line that's coming before and after. So it sort of fits in like a conversation. And it's the director's job to lead them to that place because the actor is not reading the script beforehand. They walk in, they do the line, and they perform it how you hope that they will. So as a director, you really have to have an understanding of the overall picture, and you really have to keep an ear out for everything, for the voice to make sure they stay in the proper voice, and you're looking at sync and all of these little details. And you're also responsible for it too. So I worked for Michael, who was
Michael Hagney, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who is, he's got a really good eye and a really good ear, and he'll let you know if it's not right. Sometimes nicely, sometimes not as nicely, but he wants it a certain way.
We were on a deadline. Like the deadlines were crazy, and that led to definitely tense situations, which of course it did.
Hi, it's Ashley and Jess with Wellness Reality Check. We are two health practitioners, moms, and best friends trying to navigate the world of holistic health in a balanced, productive way that brings health to our lives instead of dogmatic extremes. We'll be breaking down health trends, interviewing your favorite health influencers, and always keeping it real. We hope this podcast brings listeners back down to earth, providing a dose of reality in the often idealized world of health and wellness.
Wellness Reality Check. Follow the show now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or at wellnessrealitycheck.com.
Okay, so I want to go back a tiny little bit. So you're working on Yugioh first, and you're at 4Kids, and you're seeing this like big company, and you're like, wait, what's going on here? Like, because again, we've been talking about this throughout the podcast. Like, anime was not mainstream. Were you like, what is this company doing? Or was Pokemon so successful that you were like, awesome? I mean,
I think Pokemon was like the third year, and they had been doing seasons. I think it was probably successful at that point.
Around that, yeah.
So, I mean, I didn't have any kind of draw to anime, but I enjoyed doing this kind of work. And certainly with Yu-Gi-Oh, it was a little bit different. I remember going in there saying, I would like to do this, but I don't want to just do the ADR. I'd like to do other stuff because, quite honestly, just doing ADR can become mind-numbing. Where you're doing that 8 hours a day, just record, edit, sliding things. So it's nice to have a variety. And with Yu-Gi-Oh!
So what else were you doing?
Yu-Gi-Oh! Was the sound design also. When
you say you want to...
So I did a lot of sound design there, and that was from scratch. So there were no sound effects at all.
Yeah, explain that. Mm-hmm. Why were there no sound effects? Like, please explain what you were given and why they couldn't use the Japanese. And I don't get it.
I'm not sure if it was a licensing thing. I know with Pokemon, we used their sound effects, and we added some sound effects to it, and we replaced all the dialogue. We replaced the music. We kept Pikachu. They wanted to keep the original Pikachu. So that was part of my job at Buttons, is to isolate all the Japanese Pikachus and label them so we could use them later, happy Pikachu, sad Pikachu. Because I think actually we had Rachel doing Pikachu, Rachel Lillis doing Pikachu in the beginning, and she did a wonderful job, but the Japanese just wanted the original Pikachu in there for whatever reason.
Well, she would fill in when there was when it wasn't in the sound bank, from what I understand. Like if there was we just don't have this. Like today when we go into the studio, they have a voice ref for us if we've done the role before, and then there's pronunciation guidelines. I know 4Kids was not as organized, but like what kind of cool, interesting like databases were you keeping aside from like the Pikachu?
Well, we had this
reacts?
one database that was like a voice reference for the Pokemon. So there were, I think that at that point there was 150 Pokemon. And it was funny because in the teaser, they talked about 150 Pokemon or more, you know, like if it's successful, we'll make more. So now I mean, I haven't kept track, but I guess there's thousands at this point. But there was we
hit
1,000. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So we had a digital tape that had a guy that would say each of the Pokemon's name. And anytime there was a question of how it was pronounced, we would go to this tape. And it was a joke because the guy, it was, you know, he was very flat, he was very monotone, and everything would sound pretty much the same. So Michael would always say, okay, let's pull out that tape and hear how Charizard's going to sound, or, you know, how is he going to pronounce his name? And we'd listen to the tape and it really would be not a clue to help us get
Charizard. Just nothing.
Exactly. So I mean, that was one of our references. If it was a character that we had done in previous episodes, before the episode, I would pull in that track so we could listen to it a little bit and play it for the actor. Because a lot of the actors we work with do many different voices, so it's nice for them to sort of remember exactly what they did and how they did it, and then reference back to it also.
Basically, while you were there, you worked on, I'm looking at your LinkedIn, Pokemon, Sonic X, Yu-Gi-Oh, G.I. Joe, Kirby, Winx Club, FZero, and the promos as well. And then you did sound design for Chaotic and Ninja Turtles movie. We clearly don't have time to talk about all of that, but like if you have anything you want to add about, or any anecdotes or any like good memories, bad memories about those shows or 4Kids in general, please feel free, because I don't know.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. I mean, a lot of it was really good memories, and starting off doing the sound design for Yu-Gi-Oh was something I had never done before. And like you had asked, you know, why didn't we have their original sound effects track? I don't know if it was a licensing thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it was produced in Japan, so it must have existed somewhere, but we didn't have it. So we just got the picture. I think when I sound designed it, we didn't even have any voices. So I had a script to go by. So creating all the ambiences, like when they're on an island, you know, you have to create the ambience of the island and the birds and the water, but not too many birds. You know, I remembered early on, I found an ambience that had like backgrounds and it had birds in it, but that was no good because it was, you know, the birds would interfere with the dialogue. So you really needed to make it separate. So you had to have like the wind and the water, and then maybe a track of birds that you could kind of bring in and bring out. So that was kind of a learning curve to figure out exactly what would work and what wouldn't.
Right. And in terms of the violence, because we talk about standards and practices, you must have had very strict rules about, like, if someone gets slapped, how loud can the slap be? Like, were there crazy limits on things
so
like that?
I don't remember that so much, but I do remember jumping way ahead to Chaotic. That was a brand new show that we did. It was not produced in Japan. We did the voices first, which was a little bit unusual. We produced it like a radio show, if your listeners are that old. But we would do it line by line, and then we would put it all together. So like they were having a conversation, we'd send that off to get animated. Then we'd get the animation back, and I would work on the sound design. So I did all the sound design for that. I didn't do the Foley, which is footsteps and clothing rustles and small noises like that. But everything else, it was my responsibility. And I remember reading the script beforehand and being really worried, like, do I have all these sound effects? I mean, because it was pretty intense. I mean, if you guys have seen Chaotic, there's a lot of futuristic battling that goes on. And standards and practices didn't allow for real gun sounds. Because I think they felt like if a kid saw a gun or heard a gun, they would go out and use a gun. So everything had to be sci-fi or lasery. Creating these sounds was creative, but it was creatively draining as well. Like I remember, for example, there was one episode of Chaotic that had 28 new weapons that I had to create.
Oh my God. 28?
Yes, I remember that number.
So, like, aside from Yu-Gi-Oh that needed an existing anime, did other shows use the Japanese sound effects, or were people having to create these landscapes for, like, G.I. Joe and Kirby, Winx Club?
So those did have sound effects, but a lot of times we augmented it. One of my first lessons on Sonic was, I think there was like this thunder or lightning monster that was trying to kill Kirby, and it was like a cloud, and lightning would shoot out, and Kirby would dodge away and dodge this way. So it would like happen very often, and I thought the lightning sound that they had was terrible. So I added a different lightning sound to it, and made it kind of cool. And I played it for Michael Cagney, who was producing it. And he's like, yeah, that's great. But did you look through the whole episode? I'm like, no, why? He's like, it happens like another 1,000 times. So you actually have to add that in every single time. So it's a question of, going forward after that, like, how many times does this occur? Do we have the time to add this stuff in? It did make it sound better. So there were a lot of times that we did add it in. I believe...
right. You would just add to it.
I believe Susie Golish did a lot of that stuff with Sonic and Kirby. Mm-hmm. And then when I worked on Winx Club, I worked with Jeff Formosa, who was a sound designer, and he was fantastic. Okay. I loved working with him. I also loved it because I mixed that show, and I mixed it at home. So I have a home studio, and I would spend like 4 days a week mixing the show, and then I'd come in and play it for the producer like on a Friday. But he would get the video, and he's worked on some really amazing things. And he would send me tracks that would just blow me away. And they were all separated.
Yeah, he's on our list for sure. So what do you mean separated?
So if there was like a magic attack, like if you've seen Winx Club, there's a lot of magic involved. He would send maybe 4 or 6 separate tracks that would create that one magic attack. So I could use some, maybe not use some. I could balance them or change how it sounded. I typically had everything I needed when he would sound design it. Other times I would feel like, maybe that sound is a little lacking. And while I'm mixing it, I might have to add something else in. So like going back to chaotic, like with these weapons, like it's not just one sound effect that would create that sound. You would have to layer sounds to create it. And also there are a lot of sounds leading up to it. So if the character, pulled a weapon out of his backpack, I mean, you have to get the sound of the hand on the weapon coming out of the backpack, it powering up, maybe it has a blast, and maybe something strange comes out of it. So it's, all these different layers that would have to happen in sync with picture, and it would have to sound cool. And because I knew that somebody, was going to look at this and, really kind of pick it apart, it had to be good. It couldn't just be just the same thing that I used the last time. And then you had to catalog all this stuff too. So if this weapon showed up, 5 episodes from now, you had to have the same sound. So that show is quite intense with that.
Did you keep any cool libraries from that time, or any copies of shows that maybe lost media today? Because we're always looking for that. What do you have from your 4Kids days?
I probably have some sound effects somewhere. On a drive.
Okay, we'd love to see them.
I'd have to dig around and see.
We want to count the birds.
Exactly.
Do you have any like lost Funky Cops episodes?
Oh my goodness, I forgot about that one. Yeah.
Yeah. See, this is what we're trying to find here, Ron.
I have any.
This is where the big bucks are. I don't know if I have any
finished videos, but I found some VHS tapes a while ago, which were maybe references of mixes that I did. Because I would often do a mix and then print it to VHS and watch it on a TV at home and see how that came out.
Okay, well, if you ever want us to digitize that for you.
I'll look around. I will definitely look around. The fun thing about the Winx Club, like I said, I mixed that at home. And my daughter was probably about 9 at the time, which was a perfect age for that story. It was these fairies that went to fairy high school, and they were just, the writing was great on that. The directing of the actors were great. I just loved everything about that show. The music was incredible. So it was a really fun project to work on. And after I mixed it, I would play it for my daughter and see what her reaction was. Not so much the content, but can you hear every line? Does that sound good? And so that was really fun to do.
Did she ever have very harsh feedback for you? Like, it's not mixed quite right, Daddy.
Not too much. I remember at one point we went to commercial and it went to black. It goes to black between where the commercial actually would be in the episode. And she's like, "Is that it? What?" Nope, it picks up again. Don't worry.
More, Daddy,
exactly.
more. We don't want to leave out what you've done since working at 4Kids. I'm sure there's been some cool stuff along the way. What should people check out?
Oh, there's a fun project, thank you for asking, called New York City Revealed. And I did 3 seasons of this. And it's all about the different parts of New York. So our last season, we focused on the World Trade Center. And it talked all about the building of it. And actually, my second day at 4Kids when 9/11 happened. It goes through all of that. It goes through the rebuilding of it. So what I did is I didn't record the sound. So this was all filmed, interviews and voiceover and stuff like that. But any of the sound effects, any of the mixing, any of the enhancement on there is what I did.
Okay.
They gave me the music. They gave me the raw voices that were recorded in the field, and then I mixed it.
And you did this all from home?
All from home, all in the home studio. Very it was cool. Fantastic. I mean, again, that's a lot of work too, because we did a good episode on rats. Everybody
rats is New York rats. Oh God.
I actually never saw one on the street until this morning.
What?
I was walking on the street. I see them in the subway, but
I see him in the subway. Yeah.
Have you seen them?
I believe I've seen them on the street in New York. Sometimes you don't know if it's a mouse or a rat. No, I definitely saw. I definitely saw rats in New York. Yeah.
I thought the same thing. I'm like, it's definitely a rat. I mean, that rat probably ate the mouse.
But it didn't have a piece of pizza in its mouth.
No, nothing like that.
It wasn't Pizza Rat. Okay. So this project sounds very cool. Okay.
So we did this episode on rats, and they go through and they show all the rats in New York and where they kind of linger, and they have these dogs that actually go out and hunt out the rats. But rats don't really make noise. But I thought to make it a little bit more interesting, every time we saw them, we put a little squeak in there, and then you put a little kind of Foley of footsteps going through. So as we're running across the camera, it just, if it's missing, it would sound kind of weird, but it's there. It sounds natural.
Oh, I could not watch this episode. This is an episode I would
miss that one.
Yeah, I'll watch the other episodes.
We have bridges, airports. We have all the food in New York where it's sourced from, all the different restaurants and bodegas, and it's pretty cool stuff. It won 3 Telly Awards.
That's so great.
So it was a lot of fun to work on.
And is most of your work from home now? Are you, because I feel like you're going somewhere sometimes. I feel like we were talking about that.
Right. So currently, I do 2 things now. So currently I work in broadcast, which is where I linked up with the people for New York City Reveal. That's Cheddar News.
Okay.
And I mix sound for live television, for news and entertainment. And it seems to be a lot of that in New York. So you go into New York for that. But I also have a recording studio that I've been working on. And this is actually in a church that I've worked with for about 25 years.
Okay.
The pastor of the church is a musician, and he's very into music. We've done probably about 15 records together in his studio.
That's so cool.
It's sort of been decommissioned for a lot of years. So about 2 years ago, we re-equipped it and kind of opened it up to the public.
So now it's rentable space, like a rentable studio?
Yes, but for the Christian artist. That's the only caveat there. So,
okay.
I mean, it's in the church,
Yeah. I guess that's fair, because they don't necessarily, they want to kind of know what's being recorded in this space.
Exactly.
Yes, that seems okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a great space. It's actually, the interesting part is it was modeled after a studio that I worked at when I was 20. So there's a music studio in New Jersey, and the guy that built this studio as well. So when you step into the studio, and you can see pictures on Instagram, it's like you step back into 1970.
Oh, how cool.
The room is there, but all the equipment is it's Pro Tools like you've seen, and all kinds of cool mics.
Oh, how fun.
So yeah, you should check it out. There's pictures up there. There's a video. You can hear some sounds from the studio.
Well, send me links to all this stuff, and I'll make sure I'll put all this stuff in the show notes where you can watch Ron's stuff and see the studio That's very cool.
So that's a fun project. I really enjoy that. There's people that are in the congregation that have come up, and we offer low rates. I mean, it's hardly what a commercial studio would cost.
Right. Which is a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. He really does it to sort of help young Christian artists out, because it's hard to do this kind of quality at home.
Yeah, I mean, you guys listening hear us talk about our home studios all the time. I mean, I should explain that, like, unless I'm in a converted closet. This is not a high-end, state-of-the-art studio by any means. And our wish is that we coexist with these good studios, because if you're recording an album yes, a home studio can get the job done, but there's a huge difference with someone like working with someone like Ron and working in a space that is built just for that. So I never want you guys to think, oh, it's so easy to have a great home studio. Like, it's not as easy as it sounds, and mine is definitely imperfect. So we appreciate people who understand real sound quality like you.
Thank you. Well, you've done a smart thing. You have a really good microphone, and you have a dead area around you. So for the work that you do, it actually works out really well. I don't know if you'd want to record a band in there, but...
No, well, exactly. But there's, the truth is like, I mean, this is full disclosure. I'm on the top floor of my building. It's only three stories. It's not a big building. But I have the air conditioner compressor units right above me. And there's nothing you can do about that. Like, so now I know the tricks to take out the sound, but like... Just so you guys know, because I know everyone's like, it's so easy. Like, you'll see ads online, like, become a voice actor, cheap home studio. It's like, be wary of things like that.
That's hard, especially when you have a good microphone that's going to make your voice sound good. It's going to pick up all those noises.
Everything. Oh, yeah. Sometimes you don't want a good microphone in a bad space. You need the microphone to match the space you're in.
Right. Right.
We could do a whole other podcast about that.
Oh, yeah.
Ron, thank you so much for spending time with us. Again, look in the show notes. And thank you.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you.
What a cool career. Like, again, I feel like going from working with Lauryn Hill to working with me was just a real step down for him, and I feel kind of bad about that.
Okay, well, I don't know. Did he have like an entire database of sound bites of Lauryn Hill?
That's fair. He probably had a big Bulba sound, and I probably was less demanding, I'd say.
But also at the same time, like those were speedy records, as we've talked about on this show. Just no time for perfection, maybe, or I don't know. Then again, Sorry. Also, he talked about how just getting like pronunciations right, or just we were talking about just trying to get the right line read out of just saying Bulba when you have to be inquisitive but angry.
Well, and nobody knows more about the actors, like, who are good or bad or slow or fast than the engineers.
Yeah.
Like, they could keep our secrets, for sure. But, like, the pronunciation, so one of the things I'd love to get to the bottom of, because there's this NSYNC promo where they rap the names of some of the Pokemon, and they pronounced, I hope I'm getting this right, I think it was Muck. They said Mook. And I'm like, who was in charge? I just want to know who was in charge that day. Because that, to me, is a very big oversight.
It's funny. I was just listening to this podcast. It's an older episode, but the guys at Talking Simpsons, Bob and Henry, they do another podcast where they talk about other cartoons, and they were talking about the Batman and Superman cartoons that were on Kids WB, but they were talking about specifically when Pokemon hit it big, and they were recording all those like promos for Pokemon, and they were recording like actors from all these Western cartoons just talking about the series. And just this morning I was listening to that.
That sounds good.
Yeah, but like getting those, like hearing like Kevin Conroy explain how to catch a Pikachu is. But it seemed like for the most part, I think like they probably got those pronunciations right way more. I think NSYNC was probably a much more expensive act to book, and they probably like were just like, "Hey, you're gonna get one take."
I mean, and I wonder, like, because they probably recorded that song and then they probably were lip syncing it during the shoot. I don't know how. I'd love to figure out who worked on that, because, I mean, again, I don't want to shame anyone for them getting it wrong, but I want to shame NSYNC for getting it wrong. Is who I'd like to shame.
It's time to.
If Justin that was the one with Justin. If he could be on the podcast, I think that would be a good get.
I think that's
the odds are good. Yeah.
One of the people. That's been one of the more requested guests for this podcast.
Yeah, he was a big part of 4Kids. Mm-hmm. Something we did not talk about during the intro was all the places you can go to sign up. Listen, guys, subscribe, rate, and review. I can't say subscribe, rate, and review.
You got to sync that up. So
rate and review. If you like the podcast, you know what to do. Subscribe, rate, and review.
That's the extended version. I don't think I've heard that.
Yes, that's the extended version.
Nice. I like it.
So just like hit the 5-star button. That's so easy. If you're on Apple Podcasts, you just scroll down on the show page. I don't know where to do it on Spotify because I'm not that smart, or like on YouTube, just like a lot of stuff and subscribe to the channel. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to be a friend to the pod. I love when I listen to podcasts and they go, friend of the pod, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like,
well, friends and friend of the podcast is like a different kind of social
yeah, you're right.
Position. I don't know.
I want to make it all one position, and I'd like to say you're all my friends if you just go subscribe, rate, and review. Is that wrong?
I make no guarantees.
Steve is much harder to become friends with.
I'm guarded. Yeah. Don't dox me.
I'm easy. Oh, yeah, he's still just on this doxing thing. I mean, listen, I live in fear of doxing, but But I guess I don't think. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, Steve.
Sorry, not to put that on you.
Do? Now I'm just going to be afraid of you getting doxed. Guys, don't dox.
It's not worth it. I'm not.
No. So do all those things. Go to our website, sign up for Patreon. You can get this a week early and ad-free, which is super fun. And just $5 a month. So do that. And we will.
Catch you next time.
4Kids Flashback is a production of Maji Media, hosted by Tara Sands and Steve Yurko.
Producers are Zach Logan, Tara Sands, and Steve Yurko.
For more information, go to 4kidsflashback.com. That is the number 4. And if you worked at 4Kids and have a story you want to share, please email us at 4kidsflashback@gmail.com.
You can find us on social media at 4Kids Flashback, and to listen early and ad-free, head to patreon.com/4kidsflashback. For podcast merchandise, find links on our website and Linktree.
As they say on every podcast, if you liked this show, please subscribe, rate, and review, and tell your friends, or 4. If you want to check out other Maji Media podcasts, go to maji.media. Thanks for listening.